Okay. Yes, and we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another virtual dental shouting session. Our guest tonight, Hwajeong Kim, is a D1 dental student at UOP, University of Pacific School of Dentistry. She will be sharing her journey to dental school with us tonight. So, without further ado, please feel free to take over whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Hwajeong Kim. Again, I'm a D1 currently at University of the Pacific Arthur A. Dugoni School of Dentistry in San Francisco. So I'm pretty sure everyone can see my screen right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to get started. So a little bit about me. I'm originally from North Carolina. I was born and raised there, and then currently I'm in San Francisco. I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill in 2019 with a double major in biology and Spanish and a minor in education. During the 2 years between 2019 and 2021, I took 2 gap years. During that time, I studied for the DAT. I worked as a dental assistant. I finished a lot of my prerequisite classes, and I did a lot of volunteering and outreach. I'm also an NHSC scholar. I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but just as a little preview, depending on how many years you apply for, it pays for all of your tuition and fees. You receive a monthly stipend, and in exchange for that, you dedicate the same number of years that you receive support for serving in an underserved area following your graduation. Then a little bit about my story. I'm Korean American. Like I said, I'm fully from North Carolina. During college, I was generally undecided. I started out with a biology major, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. I only knew that I wanted to be in healthcare somehow. So I discovered dentistry halfway through my senior year in college through a Spanish interpreting position for a medical mission trip with my church. I was interpreting for a Korean medical doctor at the time, but then on the trip, there was actually also another dentist and a hygienist. And so I was able to see them work, and I was just inspired by that moment. During the 2 gap years, generally the first year I was preparing to apply, it ended up being 2 because since I had discovered it so late, I needed a full year to apply. And then the second year was the process of the application before I started. And so the second year I was just finishing up prereqs and things like that. And currently I am halfway through my D1 year at UOP. It's a quarter system. So right now I'm in my 3rd quarter. So what made me a competitive applicant? So I think my primary strength was that my DAT scores were very strong. I knew that I needed to do well on my DAT because my GPA was so low. And then secondly, I would say I had a lot of life experience and I used my gap years really well. I think a lot of my class came into dental school immediately after graduation. And so I think that was a big advantage for me. I think my time during those 2 gap years proved that I really knew I wanted to go to dental school, that I was confident in it. And because I did so much packed into those 2 years, they could tell that I took advantage of the time that I had. And then thirdly, I would say dental assisting. This shows schools that you know what a real life dental career looks like and that you still want to pursue it. And it also demonstrates that you have a lot of experience. The total amount of time I spent in dental assisting was about a year, but the time I spent in a general office was only 6 months. But even in that short amount of time, I learned so much and it really gave me a head start when I started dental school. And then lastly, I would say strong personal statement. My personal statement was very personal and cohesive. I think a lot of examples that I saw seemed very, a little bit mechanical and robotic and not very personal. And personally, when I talked to a lot of mentors who I guess had experience looking over personal statements, they said there's not really a point of making a personal statement like that because you're essentially just restating your resume, which is already in your application. So you want to bring another aspect of your personality and your story into your statement. And so mine told the spark of my story, like I said, during that dental or medical mission trip and my personality. In terms of struggles and overcoming them, like I mentioned, I applied with a low GPA. I struggled immensely with chemistry classes. I love biology, but I hate chemistry. And I had to retake or go twice, which means I had to take it 3 times total. Um, and then also the DAT study time, I was studying for it right after I graduated from college. So I was uh, working and I had to pay rent. And so I had to take time off of work to study for the DAT. And this limited the amount of time that I could really study for it. So during that time, I had to set clear goals and plans. If I fell behind, I didn't really drag myself down. I just moved on. And I think that was important. And then lastly, I think I did have a lot of condensed good dental experience because I was a dental assistant and I guess I went on medical mission trips. But because I discovered dentistry so late, I didn't have a long period of dental experience like a lot of my fellow applicants did, because a lot of them, I think, knew that they wanted to pursue dentistry maybe freshman or sophomore year of college. But because of that late discovery, I just did as much as I could in terms of variety and amount. I think schools understand that every person's situation is different. And as long as they know that you are fully capable of taking advantage of the situation that you're put in, they will look upon that very favorably. And then for extracurricular activities, my main tip would be to do things that you're passionate about. I think a lot of applicants are very focused on making their extracurriculars super relevant to dentistry, which is very important. But I think this is another way to showcase your personality and your strengths. So for me, because I discovered dentistry late, I had a lot of extracurricular activities that weren't really related to dentistry. I tutored for like all of college and after college in like SAT and school. And then I was also a Sunday school teacher at church. I was on a hip hop dance team in college. I was on the praise team and praise team leader at church. And then I did a ton of volunteering on mission trips and things like that. And although none of these are directly related to dentistry, I actually incorporated most of these into my personal statement to bring out aspects of why they made me a strong potential dentist in the future. So tutoring, being a teacher, being a leader, taking initiative, caring about underserved populations. I think those all showed through my extracurricular activities. And then I also did some dental related things. But I think this is important not just for your application, but also to truly figure out yourself if you enjoy dentistry. I feel like, I'm not sure if I'm completely right about this, but I feel like a good amount of dental students at my school at least are pursuing dentistry because it's kind of in their family, like their parents are dentists or they have a lot of relatives who are dentists. And I feel like they don't have as much of a chance to really figure out if they themselves enjoy it. And I think that's really important. So I think doing dental assisting, if you're able to, going on dental mission trips, shadowing, those things are all really important, not just for your application, but also for yourself. Thirdly, I would say to use your connections. I think when I first decided that I wanted to pursue dentistry, I felt a little lost because I didn't really know a lot of people around me who were in dentistry. But I realized that I had friends of friends or friends of friends of friends who were in dentistry, or people at church that even if I didn't know very well, I could still reach out to them. So I would say definitely take advantage of your environment, of your community, because there probably is some way that you can kind of get your foot into the door. And then lastly, I would say look and ask for help. So when I first started pursuing it, I went heavily into the DT Bootcamp Facebook group. And that group is just filled with so many tips and just students and pre-dents looking for help and giving out advice. I learned so much through that group. And even if you're not using Bootcamp, I'm pretty sure you can still join it. So I would highly recommend that. And then letters of recommendation. So the essence of building a relationship with your professors. Being a biology major in college, it was definitely difficult to build a relationship because most of my classes were at least 300 students, especially the beginning classes. And a lot of these professors are teaching several classes per semester, every semester, year after year. And it's hard for them to remember any particular student unless you had an amazing relationship with them. So my realistic tip would just be to be a good student, because professors who are willing to write you a letter of recommendation, even if they don't know you, the way that they're going to do that is to just go back to the grade that you got in the class. And if they saw that you got a good grade, then they'll write well about you. And then for smaller classes, I guess just going to office hours, if you're struggling, being honest to them about it, because then they can really get to know you through that. Um, but I think personally, letters of recommendation, I think people on both sides know that it's very mechanical, and even schools know that most of the letters aren't going to be from professors that you knew very well. It's just kind of a way to prove that you're able to get a professor to speak well of you and that you were a good student. And so I think that's really all it is. In terms of finding a mentor, personally, I didn't really have a mentor because I didn't have a lot of dental or people in dentistry around me. But I did take advantage of help around me. I did have a friend who had just gone into dental school. And so I asked him for help all the time. I had friends of friends who were dentists. So then I reached out to them. I asked them for tips and things like that. And then lastly, I would to make sure you go about it very respectfully and professionally. Even though it's, one letter of recommendation, you might think that it's a very simple act that someone can do. It does take them a lot of time and energy to write it. And not only that, if they're teaching several classes or big classes, they're probably writing several letters of recommendation every semester, every year. And that takes a lot out of them. And so my biggest tips would be to make sure you give them enough time. And that's just out of respect, that they're able to do it on their own timeline, and make sure that they get it back to you by your deadline. Make it as easy as possible for them. And that means, sending over your personal statement, sending over your resume, giving them all the information they need to write you the letter that you want them to write you. And then lastly, I would say to send thank you letters and gifts if you'd like afterwards, to just show your appreciation. I think if you receive it and then you just fall off the face of the earth, they're going to feel a little taken advantage of. And then choosing dental schools. In terms of things to look for in dental schools, I think these are I feel like this is well stated often, but those are some of the things on that first A bullet points that I would say to look at. And then I would say to prioritize what is the most important to you and how you determine that. And the way that I would recommend you to determine what's most important is to examine your life right now in the present, and to really reflect on what makes you happy right now, what makes you sad, what is disappointing about your life currently. Are you a type of person that cares about the journey as much as the end goal, or are you the type of person where all that matters is the end? And I think those things are very important. The journey is just as important type of person. And so for me, going to a place where I liked the class atmosphere, the clinical training, the collaboration of the students, that kind of thing was very important to me. And so bottom line, don't apply to any schools that you cannot see yourself going to. I feel like this is, if you are on the Facebook bootcamp group, this is often stated, but if you do end up getting into just one school, and then you realize that you never really wanted to go to that school in the first place, and then you end up rejecting them, hoping to apply the next year, that's going to be looked at very negatively, and those schools can let other schools know, and that can really put you in a hole for following years. And just in general, it's a waste of time and money and energy. The application process is really expensive, so it's really important that you really reflect on what schools you would actually go to before you send in that application. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the NHSA Scholarship. Just to clarify, even when I was applying, I didn't know that much about it. I feel like it's a little hard to find information about it because the amount of students that receive it is so small. But this is not the same thing as the NHSC loan repayment program. The one I have is a scholarship program, meaning that they pay for your tuition and fees while you're in the program, and then you serve for a certain number of years after, and then you also get the monthly stipend. But then the loan repayment program is after you finish school, you enter that program to work in an underserved area, and then by the amount of time you worked, they'll forgive a certain number or a certain amount of your loans. So just to clarify, I'm not talking about the loan repayment program. So again, this pays for all your tuition and fees, and it provides a monthly stipend. Currently, the monthly stipend is $14.34 before taxes. This amount doesn't fluctuate depending on where you live or your cost of living, which kind of sucks because since San Francisco is so expensive, that is not enough. That's like barely enough for my rent and definitely not enough for my other living costs. And then they also pay you an ORC payment once a year. This is other reasonable costs. And this is kind of they determine the number and you can't request to change it, but this is them determining extra fees that you might need for transportation, books, things like that. And they'll determine that and just send that to you at the beginning of the year. And so, like I said, you serve 1 year for each year that the scholarship provides, but the exception is that flat out the minimum service requirement is 2 years. So even if you only receive 1 year of scholarship, you'll still have to serve 2 years afterwards, at least. And then also there aren't specializations that are eligible other than primary care. So I think I mentioned that on the next slide, but you have to be in primary care to do this. And you can take out additional loans on top of this, but only up until the maximum cost of attendance of your school. So for example, UOP, I think the maximum cost of attendance is $183,000 a year. And then I receive, I think, about $140,000 in the tuition and fees. And then I think I receive almost $20,000 in the stipend amount. So then the amount left up until that $183,000 is how much I can take out in loans, but I cannot take out more than that unless you're doing private. And then just to clarify how the priority works in this application, the first priority is if you're a current or former NHSC participant. So for example, if you applied for the 1 year and then you realize, oh, actually I want to do more than that, then you'll be given first priority to receive that. Secondly, this is going to be the most relevant, but the second priority is going to be if you have characteristics likely that you'll remain in the HPSA. HPSA is the name of basically locations that are approved to be NHSC locations. So the locations that you'll work in after you graduate. So if you've done a lot of mission trips, volunteering, things like that, and you've shown them that you actually personally are passionate about serving underserved people, then you're more likely to receive the scholarship. And I think that was one of my strongest points because I've been on mission trips every summer since my junior year of high school. And so I think that was a very strong part for me. And then thirdly, if you're from a disadvantaged background, you can look this up on the website, what that means, but I don't think it's going to apply to a lot of students. So yeah, like I said, if you want to receive the scholarship, you need to pack your resume with outreach, mission trips, service, volunteering, all that type of stuff. And then just a few facts about the application. Deadline is typically early to mid-May of the year you matriculate. So I started school July of 2021 last year. So I had to apply by May of that same year. There is an FDoc requirement. So your first day of classes has to be on or before September 30th. I don't know particularly why, but I think that's because that's when they decide who receives it. And that's when they start dispersing your money. And it can be complicated if your school hasn't started yet. I'm not sure. That's what I assume. So like I said, you are notified of the award by the latest September 30th, at least this past year. A few things that they require, there's definitely more, but some of the main things are your transcript. You have to write 3 essays, 2 recommendation letters, resume, various forms and things like that. It is very competitive. About 10% of applicants actually end up receiving the award, but this past year they were able to award more because of extra funding. You do have to remain in good academic standing and full-time, which seems easy, but in dental school that can be very hard because a lot of students actually do like fail classes, and so they have to be in remediation. And if they fail that again, then that's what makes them repeat the year. But for example, we had an anatomy class that spanned the first 2 quarters. And so if you fail that, then you have a chance to make that up and take it again third or fourth quarter. But for the scholarship, you're not able to be in that remediation. If you're in that remediation, there's a potential for you to lose a scholarship or to lose the stipend, monthly stipend. So that can be difficult for some students. And like I said, if you hope to do residencies, there are pre-approved ones because they consider these still in primary care. So some of those are pediatrics, geriatrics, AEGD, GPR, and public health dentistry. And then, like I said, HPSA sites are the NHSC approved sites that you would work in after. And I think this might be the last slide. What advice would I give you? I would say to trust that you'll find your path when you're meant to and don't rush your president. I think I share this because I personally am always either living in the past or the future. I'm always reminiscing about what used to be and how life was so great, or I'm always looking to something greater in the future, but I'm never truly present right now. But I think that's really important because we realize that it's all in your head. When you're so preoccupied with what you have to do by a certain timeline, what the future is supposed to hold, that can really hold you down. And I think with more life experience, you realize that the future never happens exactly the way you plan it to. And so there's no point of letting that bog you down when we don't have that control anyway. So I would say just if you have problems of indecisiveness or there's just ambiguity in your future, just trust that you'll get to your path the way you're meant to and at the time you're meant to. And so be patient about that. And then again, don't let 1 or 2 weaknesses on your application discourage you. I definitely had weaknesses, my low GPA, my lack of dental experience and things like that, but really just look at what you can strengthen to balance that out. And schools will realize that they're looking for, passionate students, not just, robotic students who just have everything set. And then my last tip would be not to compare yourself to others. I think this is especially hard once you're in dental school because you're all taking the same classes, the same practicals, the same tests, and you all get your scores back at the same time. And I feel like some students, when they first get their scores back, they're happy about them because when you first get it back and you don't know anyone else's score, you're comparing your score currently to your past score. And so you're like, oh, I did better. That's great. But then you hear someone else's score and it's better than yours. And then suddenly you think that your score isn't as valuable anymore. But I think it's important to realize that your achievements are of an absolute value, whether you choose to lower them by comparing them to others or not. So don't lower your achievements because of comparison to others, and just know that you only need to compare you to yourself in the past. As long as you're improving, that's really all matters. But yes, that's all. I'm not sure if we have any questions.
Yes, we have questions that we collected from Instagram. So here's a question. I think this student is asking approximately how long does it take to be a dentist? I mean, probably in UOP program, it's different than the other dental school. I'm not sure.
Yes. So currently UOP is the only school in the US that has the 3-year program. All the other schools will be 4 years to become a dentist. But I think I did hear it might be Roseman who is trying to get a 3-year program in the next few years. Yes.
Okay. Did you get any certifications like dental assisting when getting experience?
Oh, right. So for dental assisting, you have to look at your state's rules because each state has different requirements. For North Carolina, fortunately, I didn't need to go to dental assisting school. I didn't need to get any kind of certification. I just had to find a dentist who was willing to train me on the job, which wasn't that hard. But then I also did get my X-ray certification because that's a big part of what you do as a dental assistant. And if you can't really take X-rays, there's a lot that you're missing out on, and it might be harder to get hired.
Hmm. And I do have my a personal question. So when you're putting hours on the resume, how would the dental school know if you're putting something real or if it's a lie? how do you like make sure that it's real, like, you know?
Right. So I'm not, I feel like most of the time, actually, I'm not too sure, but I'm not sure if they actually call to confirm. You do have to put in like contact information for the offices where you received hours. So they do have the chance to call and
Hmm.
confirm them. But I would say just to make sure that there are no discrepancies, if if the dentist that you're working for or shadowing for is a type where they're very particular about like how many hours you work, I would say you should keep like a spreadsheet of your hours, and then maybe have that dentist look at it or sign off
Hmm.
before you apply. The dentist I worked for, he wasn't as strict, and so um, I put in the amount of hours I had estimated. It wasn't an exact number, but it was a general estimation of like weekly hours. And I knew that he would know that it's a generally correct amount. So he would, if he did get the call, he would be like, yeah, she did work that amount of time.
Okay, thank you. And how did you find medical mission trips to go on?
Um, Personally, I grew up in a church. Basically, I'd gone to this church my whole life, and they're very mission trip minded, and so they would send people on mission trips every summer. But I did have to get a special invite to go on this medical mission trip, and I would say that it's important that you prove that you are actually useful for these trips because first of all, it is hard to go on a medical mission trip with like actual professionals because I was just a student. I'm not a dentist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a PA, like I'm none of that. And so typically I wouldn't have been able to go, but because I everyone knew that I spoke Spanish and that I could speak Korean and I could interpret, they knew that I'd be useful on the trip. And so they invited me to go. So I would say definitely make sure that you are playing on your strengths.
Yeah, that's true, that's true. And what was the most memorable trip that you have been on?
I would say the medical mission trip, even though I've been on a bunch of mission trips, I think because that's the first one where I was like inspired. It like, I don't know, it felt like a movie. Like the moment where I saw the dentist working. It's because I was um interpreting for the medical doctor and it was just so disappointing. Not disappointing, but it was exhausting because the demographic of Mexico, a lot of them have, diabetes.
Hmm.
And so most of the time it was just like, oh, you have diabetes, let's give you some insulin. But you know that that's not really a long-term
Hmm.
solution. And then I'm just translating the same thing over and over again. And it's just really sad. And then I went downstairs because there were no more patients for us. And I went downstairs and the dentist was working her butt off. And there was like a line all the way across the clinic
Oh man.
of people who are waiting for dental treatment. And I was just inspired by that. And it was a great trip.
And how long was the trip? Is it a week or
It
two?
was, no, it was only 3 days.
Three
And it
days,
was on
man.
I'm pretty sure it was on my Thanksgiving break.
Oh, so you spent your Thanksgiving break. Oh man, that
Yeah.
shows dedication. That shows dedication. You, you mentioned that you studied Spanish as minor. What do you think that has helped you in your application or could have been an advantage for your future?
Right. So for Spanish, I think it opened, like I just said, I think it opened up a lot of opportunities for me in the past to do, medical mission trips to get into dental school. I think also when I was volunteering in like nonprofit dental programs, like clinics where they do work for free, I was able to interpret for, Spanish speakers there. And I think even now we're going into clinic in our second year, so in 6 months, which is crazy. Um, you'll have I'll have an opportunity to put my Spanish to use because there are going to be patients who speak like only Chinese or only
Hmm.
Korean or only Spanish. And you are able to see those patients because you speak their language.
Hmm. And what do you think UOP is specifically looking for in students?
Oh, UOP. So I do know that UOP is one of the schools where they look for a higher DAT score, and they'll forgive a slightly lower GPA if you have a strong DAT score. I think they also put a lot of emphasis on the PAT score specifically. I also did well on that, so I feel like that's why. Um, and I don't know, I think a lot of UOP students end up in general practice or end up owning their own practices. And so I think I would assume that they're looking for students who show that kind of leadership, that initiative to be like leaders in their fields and in their offices in the future.
That's true, that's true. I heard that like they look at the grades pretty heavily, but let's say
Mhm.
if a student has bad score and bad DAT, what would you advise them to work on to prove that they can make it?
Specifically for DAT, I if it's low, I would say it would be worth it to retake it. And then for GPA, did I was able to hire it a little bit through the prerequisites and post-bac classes I took after graduating, but it didn't raise it up that much. So if you have a low DAT, I would say retake it. And if you have low GPA, if it's super low, like in the twos, I would probably recommend doing a master or
Master.
post-bac program or a master's or something like that. But if it's in the low threes, I would say if you can really ace your DAT, like very high scores, then
Hmm.
I think it's still worth it to apply.
Hmm. What was the interview process like?
Oh, the interview process. My experience was different because we were in the COVID application year, so all the interviews were online. But it was a 2 day process. The first day is just like an information day. So they give a presentation on the school, they do a tour, they even give like a financial presentation, which is important for EOP because it's very expensive here. But then the second day was kind of when you did a lot of the actual interviews. So I had a student interviewer, and then I had a faculty interviewer who's actually my row instructor this year or this quarter. And then you just also do a lot of talking within the group. I think also UOP is known for um, interviewing to accept, meaning that if you receive an interview from UOP, typically they are planning to accept you. I
Mm.
think it's at least 90% of the students that they interview, they end up accepting.
Hmm. And did you only apply to University of Pacific or as well as other dental
No,
schools?
so I applied to about 10, which I don't know if that's average, maybe a little less than average, but I applied to two in-states in North Carolina, and then the others, I was a little bit careless and I just kind of applied to random schools, which I would not recommend that you do. um, but I think my thought process was I wanted to get into UNC Dental School, which is a
Hmm.
really good program, but it's very competitive. And I didn't even end up getting an interview. So because I didn't get into UNC, it was kind of like, well, I don't really have a preference other than staying in state. So I ended up choosing UOP because they had a very good clinical training that I knew of. And I thought I would like the location. And I knew that it was very collaborative, a good class atmosphere. So I think it checked off a lot of boxes after I realized that I wasn't getting into my first choice.
And you said you thought that it's gonna fit what you think that you San Francisco is gonna be like, but after you get there, did you feel like it's what you imagined before, the environment and the school?
So because I grew up or because I spent my whole life in North Carolina, I guess I don't have that much experience to say like I would have been that confident to know if I would like San Francisco, but I thought I would like San Francisco because I had visited a few times. And when I visited for like day trips, I was like, wow, it's so fun and like the city's so cool and things like that. But then when I came here, I realized that it's really expensive and like there aren't as many good restaurants and cafes as I thought.
Oh,
And safety is like a much bigger issue than I realized. And then I think the things that are strengths about San Francisco, like hiking, like I think there are a lot of good areas here. but I hate hiking, so it's not relevant. Yeah, just things like that. I feel like it's just not a good fit for me, but I'm still
hmm
happy to be
hmm
here for this
So,
opportunity.
so you're probably not planning to stay in San Francisco for your future.
Oh no. I think as soon as I graduate, I'm
You're
gonna
gonna move
go
back
back
to.
to North Carolina. Yeah.
Okay, that was a good idea. And University Pacific is a 3-year program. So, what do you think that the university did well on its curriculum to make students well prepared for the future?
So I think UOP's curriculum is very well made and planned. And I think also the faculty are very keen on being willing to adjust the schedule so that it works the best. So I think it's not a school that like is obsessed with staying with tradition or keeping it the same just because that's how we've done it. I think they're very flexible and willing to try different things with each class. And so I think with each year, there's something new in the schedule that they're always trying, which I think is really great. And I think also the Helix curriculum, which is like blending the didactic and the clinical together so that you can actually retain the stuff you learn and then apply it, I think is very helpful because a lot of schools they have 2 years of didactics and then 2 years of clinic. But I think sometimes it's hard to kind of connect those two because it's so isolated. Um, but I think that's really important. And then also because they just drill the clinical skills so hard, I feel like if the expectation is like super high, at least everyone will be like,
hmm
good enough. So I think UOP does prepare us really well for practice.
Will you expand on that? What do you mean, like their expectations are high? Do they give you bad grades for, like, are their standards strict?
Yes. I would just say that their grading is really strict. And then clinic days, so our Wednesdays and Thursdays are the days that we actually learn the clinical training. It just moves so fast. You learn something new every single week, and then you just have homework every single week. Um, but I think in terms of the expectations being high, I didn't realize it because it's not like I had much experience. It's not like I had any experience at other dental schools, but um, realizing that the the expectations that we're trying to meet aren't even
Real
like sometimes the
realistic?
average, yeah, sometimes aren't even like the average performance of the average dentist,
hmm
or like realizing that when you actually go to clinic the rules are much more lax or like
hmm
it's not as strict.
hmm
So I think they want to teach us how to do everything perfectly and to a T so that we can learn those skills even if when we go to clinic it won't be as strict,
hmm
if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. From what I know, UOP is what so-called the accelerated program. Could you expand on that and simply explain how the system works?
Oh, right. So I can't speak much on the undergraduate program. UOP has an undergraduate pre-dental program. It's
hmm
either 2+3, 3+3, or I think 4+3. The second three is obviously the 3 dental school
Yeah.
years, and then the first number is how many years you spend in undergrad. For the actual dental program, again, it's 3 years. First year is a blend of didactic and clinical in sim lab. So you're just working on the mannequins. And then second year is when you actually start seeing real patients. You also do have some didactic classes that year. And then third year, I'm pretty sure you just see patients and then you study for boards.
Okay. And we have like 3 more questions left. I have a friend who is also considering whether to go for medicine or dentistry. And as you mentioned, you said you figured out that you want dentistry in your senior year, which is a little bit kind of like in the late part. And
Mhm.
what would be your advice on choosing or figuring out which field to go into?
Um, I would say that medicine and dentistry are very, very different. I I feel like even if you're able to get a little bit of experience in both, it shouldn't be too hard to decide which way to go because
hmm
dentistry, you have to have good hand skills or the willingness to learn good hand skills. And it's a very operative job. You're always going to be like at the chair in the patient's mouth doing
Yeah.
procedures. While medicine, depending on where you want to go to, if you're doing primary care, it's not very operative. You're like sitting down in rooms, speaking with patients, diagnosing, things like that. So I would say it's very different. And I think being able to get some experience will help you immensely on deciding which way you want to go.
Hmm. And how will you explain, for example, low GPAs or any other failures that maybe you had in college? How would you explain that on your personal statement, or would you rather not explain it or put it down on the essay?
For low GPA or any weaknesses, I didn't include that in my personal statement just because what I wanted my personal statement to be, it wasn't relevant. Like I was like telling a story about the medical mission trip, and then it'd be weird to talk about my low GPA there.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, I would say if your personal statement is kind of like in the same topic, then feel free to go ahead and explain your low GPA. But I think most of the time for like supplemental questions that schools might send you, sometimes those questions are already like, oh, do you have low GPA or things like that? Can you explain what that was? Or in interview situations, like most of the time, if you have, a C or a D or whatever, they'll ask you, oh, can you explain this low grade? So I think most of the time you have an opportunity to explain it. And I personally wouldn't really waste my personal statement on explaining that because I don't think it's a very personal
Hmm.
story, unless it is a personal story for you.
And I'm a little bit interested about how you constructed your personal statement. Did you like start with a story, or how did you attract the attention of the reader?
Right. So it was very story-like it felt like a novel.
Hmm.
But I kind of used like the strategy of um starting with an anecdote and then ending with the same anecdote, if that makes
Uh-huh.
sense.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I talked about like how exhausted I was interpreting for the medical doctor, how disappointing it was, things like that. And then I talked about how I went downstairs and then I saw the dentist working. I explained what I saw, how it felt, what I started thinking. And then I went back into my past and was talking about, oh, my tutoring, my Sunday school leading, my praise team leading, all those random things that I was passionate about during college. I realized like why those things attracted me and how those strengths came together in a dental profession.
Hmm.
And that's kind of how I ended it.
And do you think personal statement has to be very serious, or you can maybe put like a line of joke? Do you think that would be something great to do?
Yeah, I think especially if it's your personality to be, to crack
To
jokes
be
or,
funny?
make it lighthearted. Yeah, definitely do that. Don't do it if that's not actually you, because
Uh,
then
yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like it'll be obvious. It won't really be
I think
funny.
it'll be more. Yeah, it's gonna be awkward if your joke is not funny. So.
Yeah.
So last question. Is NHSC similar to military scholarship?
Oh, it is uh it is similar, I think, because they also receive a monthly stipend. They also get their tuition and fees paid and things like that. And then they also serve like the same number of years afterwards. It's just
Mhm.
whether you want to do military
Military.
or,
Yeah.
yeah, just, regular.
Hmm. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you so much. I think that's all we have for today. And I understand. I think I know that you have classes maybe on Saturday or Sunday on the weekends. But thank you so much for taking your time and your dedication into this presentation. So
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
the quiz will be up in within the 30 minutes. So feel free to click on the link and fill out the quiz. Oh, this is for the
Okay.
viewers. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's